Maya-chan walked into her music theory class 15 minutes early, just like she did every Tuesday and Thursday morning. She always picked the same seat in the back corner, where she could see everyone but nobody really noticed her. Her old backpack made a soft thud as she dropped it beside her chair, and she pulled out a worn notebook that had seen better days. At 19, Maya looked different from most of her classmates. While they wore trendy clothes and carried expensive coffee cups, she had on a simple gray sweater and jeans that had been washed so many times they were soft as cotton. Her sneakers were clean but clearly old, with small scuffs that told stories of long walks and careful budgeting. The other students slowly filled the room, chatting about weekend parties and upcoming spring break plans. Maya listened quietly, sometimes smiling at their conversations but never joining in. She had worked 2 jobs for 2 years after high school, saving every penny she could for college. While her classmates had been enjoying senior year activities and summer vacations, she had been serving tables at a diner and stocking shelves at a grocery store. Professor Williams entered the room, carrying his usual stack of papers and coffee mug. He was a tall man in his 50s with graying hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Maya actually liked him, even though he saw her as just another average student trying to get through her required music credits. "Good morning, everyone," Professor Williams said, setting his things down on the desk. "I hope you're all ready for today because we're going to talk about your final projects." A few students groaned, but most leaned forward with interest. Maya felt her stomach tighten. Final projects in music classes usually meant performing, and performing meant standing in front of people, being judged, being noticed. "This semester, each of you will perform a solo piano piece at our end-of-term recital," Professor Williams continued. "Now, before anyone starts panicking, let me explain how this will work." Maya's heart began to beat faster. She had been dreading this moment since the beginning of the semester. She looked around the room and saw her classmates' faces showing everything from excitement to nervousness. "I will be assigning each piece based on your current skill level and progress in class," the professor explained. "Some of you will get pieces that challenge you to grow. Others will get pieces that let you showcase what you've already mastered. The goal is for everyone to have a successful performance." Over the next 20 minutes, Professor Williams called students up to his desk one by one. Maya watched as her classmates received their assignments. Jenny, who had been playing piano since elementary school, got a Mozart sonata that made her smile. David, who struggled with basic scales, received a simpler piece that still sounded impressive. Each assignment seemed perfectly matched to what Professor Williams had observed about each student's abilities. Maya was one of the last students called. She walked to the front of the room, her legs feeling heavier with each step. "Professor." Williams looked up at her with a gentle smile, but there was something in his expression that made her nervous. "Maya," he said, reaching for a particularly thick stack of sheet music, "I've been watching your progress this semester, and I think you're ready for something that will really push you to grow." He placed the music in front of her, and Maya felt her breath catch in her throat. The title page read Ballade No. 1 in G minor, Op. 23 by Frédéric Chopin. Even someone with limited musical knowledge would recognize this as a serious piece of classical music. "This is one of Chopin's most beautiful ballades," Professor Williams explained. "It's challenging, yes, but I believe you have the potential to handle it. Sometimes we need to reach beyond what we think we can do." The classroom had gone completely silent. Maya could feel every pair of eyes in the room focused on her. She looked down at the music, seeing the dense notes covering every page, the complex rhythms and intricate passages that would intimidate most piano students. What Professor Williams didn't know, what nobody in that room knew, was that Maya had been staring at this exact piece of music for over 3 years. She had studied every note, every phrase, every subtle marking that Chopin had written. She knew this piece better than some pianists who had been playing it for decades, but she couldn't tell them that. She couldn't explain that her grandmother had introduced her to this ballade when she was 16, or that she had spent countless hours analyzing its structure and emotional content. She couldn't reveal that she had been playing piano since she was 4 years old, learning in secret in her grandmother's small apartment, Maya's parents had immigrated from Taiwan when she was 2, bringing with them dreams of their daughter becoming a doctor or engineer. Music was not practical, they said. Music didn't pay bills or provide security. When Maya had shown early interest in piano, her parents had gently but firmly redirected her attention to math and science. So Maya had learned to keep her musical life separate from everything else. Her grandmother, who had studied piano at a conservatory in Taipei before the family came to America, became her secret teacher. Every afternoon after school, Maya would tell her parents she was going to the library to study. Instead, she would take 2 buses to her grandmother's apartment, where an old upright piano waited in the living room. For 15 years, Maya had lived this double life. At home and at school, she was the quiet, studious girl who focused on practical subjects. In her grandmother's apartment, she was a pianist who could play complex pieces with deep understanding and emotional maturity. The irony of her situation wasn't lost on her. Here she was, finally in a music class where she could legitimately study what she loved, and she had to pretend to be a beginner. She had enrolled in Music Theory 101 not because she needed to learn the basics, but because she wanted to be around music in an official capacity for the first time in her life. Maya? Professor Williams's voice brought her back to the present moment. Are you all right with this assignment? I know it's ambitious, but I have faith in your abilities. Maya looked up at him, seeing genuine encouragement in his eyes. He thought he was giving her a challenging piece that would help her grow as a musician. He had no idea he was handing her something she could probably teach him about. Yes, sir, she said quietly. I'll do my best. As she walked back to her seat, Maya could hear the whispers starting. Some of her classmates looked sympathetic, thinking Professor Williams was being too hard on her. Others seemed curious to see what would happen when the quiet girl in the back corner tried to tackle one of the most difficult pieces in the piano repertoire. Tommy, who sat 2 seats away from her, leaned over and whispered, Dude, that's intense. Are you sure you can handle that? Maya just nodded and smiled, tucking the music into her backpack. She spent the rest of class listening to Professor Williams explain the details of the recital, all while her mind raced with the implications of what had just happened. That evening, Maya sat in her small dorm room staring at the sheet music spread across her desk. Her roommate was at a study group, so she was alone with her thoughts and the weight of her secret. She could back out, she knew. She could go to Professor Williams tomorrow and ask for something easier. He would understand. He might even be relieved, but as she looked at the familiar notes on the page, Maya felt something she hadn't experienced in years. For the first time since starting college, she had the chance to show what she could really do. The question was whether she was brave enough to take it. The next 3 weeks were the longest of Maya's life. Every morning, she woke up with a knot in her stomach, knowing she had to face another day of pretending to struggle with music that flowed through her veins like blood. The Chopin Ballade sat on her desk like a beautiful secret, its pages worn from her careful study but never actually played. Her biggest problem wasn't learning the piece. It was finding somewhere to practice it without anyone discovering her real abilities. The music building had 12 practice rooms, but they all required reservations through the department secretary. Mayo couldn't book a room without raising questions about why she needed so much practice time for a piece that was supposedly beyond her skill level. Her dorm room was impossible too. The walls were thin, and her neighbor Kelly was a light sleeper, who complained about everything from loud typing to phone conversations. Even if Maya had a piano in her room, which she didn't, she couldn't risk anyone hearing her play at her actual level. So Maya developed a different strategy. She spent hours in the library, not reading about music theory like her classmates assumed, but studying the Chopin score with the intensity of a detective examining evidence. She would sit at a corner table on the 3rd floor where few people bothered to go and work through each measure in her mind. Her fingers would move silently across the wooden table, practicing the complex passages while she heard every note perfectly in her head. Years of practicing on her grandmother's old piano had trained her to feel the music even without sound. She could sense the weight of each key, the subtle differences in touch that would bring out the melody or support the harmony. but mental. Practice only went so far. Maya needed to feel the actual keys under her fingers, to hear the real sound of the piano responding to her touch. That's when she remembered her work-study job at the campus facilities department. 3 mornings a week, Maya cleaned offices and classrooms to help pay for her tuition. The job gave her access to buildings that most students never saw, including the basement storage areas of the music building. She had discovered an old upright piano down there during her first week, covered in dust and surrounded by broken music stands and outdated equipment. The piano was far from perfect. Several keys stuck, and it hadn't been tuned in years, but it was better than nothing, and more importantly, it was completely private. The storage room was soundproofed enough that someone would have to be standing right outside the door to hear anything. Maya started staying after her cleaning shifts, telling her supervisor she needed extra time to finish her work. In reality, she would lock herself in the storage room and finally let her hands remember what they had been trained to do. For 15 years, the first time she played the Chopin Ballade on that old piano, Maya nearly cried. Her fingers found the familiar patterns, and even with the instrument's limitations, the music came alive in ways that mental practice could never achieve. She played softly, barely pressing the keys, but every note was exactly where it should be. During the day, however, Maya had to maintain her carefully constructed image. In music theory class, she would ask basic questions about concepts she had mastered years ago. When Professor Williams explained simple chord progressions, Maya would nod thoughtfully and take notes on information she could have taught herself. The hardest part was watching her classmates practice their assigned pieces. The music building had large windows in the practice rooms, and Maya could see students working on their music as she walked between classes. She would stop and listen, noticing technical mistakes that made her fingers itch to demonstrate the correct technique. Jenny was struggling with the tempo in her Mozart sonata, rushing through the fast sections and dragging during the slow parts. David was having trouble with basic fingering in his simpler piece, using awkward hand positions that would limit his ability to play smoothly. Maya wanted to help them, but offering advice would raise questions about her own musical knowledge. The whispers about Maya's assignment had spread beyond their music theory class. Students in other music courses had heard about the girl who got stuck with an impossible piece. Some felt sorry for her, others were curious to see what would happen, and a few seemed to enjoy the drama of it all. Maya overheard conversations in the cafeteria and the library, even in the bathroom. People would lower their voices when she walked by, then continue talking once they thought she was out of earshot. She heard herself described as that poor girl, the one who's going to crash and burn, and Professor Williams's latest victim. The attention was exhausting. Maya had spent most of her life trying to be invisible, and now she was the center of speculation throughout the music department. She started taking different routes between classes to avoid the practice rooms, where the sound of other students playing reminded her of everything she was hiding. Professor Williams began checking on her progress more frequently. After class, he would ask how her practice was going, offer suggestions for breaking down difficult passages, and even suggest she might want to consider switching to an easier piece. "There's no shame in recognizing when something might be too ambitious," he said one Thursday afternoon. "I'd rather see you succeed with a piece that fits your current abilities than struggle with something that's beyond your reach." Maya had to bite her tongue to keep from responding honestly. She wanted to tell him that the piece wasn't beyond her reach at all, that she understood its emotional content and technical demands better than most piano students ever would. Instead, she thanked him for his concern and promised to keep working hard. The conversations with Professor Williams were torture in their own way. He was genuinely trying to help, offering to work with her one-on-one to break down the most challenging sections. Maya had to pretend to be grateful while secretly knowing she could probably teach him things about the piece he had never considered. Her academic advisor, Dr. Peterson, called her into his office during the third week. He was a kind man who genuinely cared about his students' success, and Maya could see the concern in his eyes as she sat across from his desk. "Maya, I've been hearing some things about your music class," he said gently. Professor Williams mentioned that you might be struggling with your final project. I want you to know that there are options if you need to make changes. Maya felt her heart sink. Even the administration was talking about her situation. She assured Dr. Peterson that she was managing fine, but she could see he wasn't entirely convinced. Music is a wonderful subject, he continued, but it's not for everyone. There's absolutely nothing wrong with discovering that your talents lie elsewhere. Have you considered exploring other areas of study? After leaving Dr. Peterson's office, Maya walked directly to her grandmother's nursing home. It was a 30-minute bus ride, but she needed to see the one person who knew her secret. Her grandmother, now 82 and dealing with early-stage dementia, lived in a small but comfortable room filled with photographs and memories from her life in Taiwan. "Grandma," Maya said, sitting beside the elderly woman's bed, "I don't know if I can do this anymore." Her grandmother looked at her with eyes that were still sharp despite her condition. "What's troubling you, little bird?" she asked, using the nickname she had given Maya when she was small. Maya explained the situation. The whispers, the pressure, the constant need to pretend to be someone she wasn't. Her grandmother listened patiently, nodding occasionally and holding Maya's hand. "You know," her grandmother said finally, "when I was studying piano in Taiwan, my teacher told me something I never forgot. He said that music isn't about impressing other people. It's about being honest with yourself and with the composer who wrote the notes. But everyone expects me to fail," Maya replied. "They think I'm not good enough." Her grandmother squeezed her hand. "Sometimes, little bird, the world isn't ready for what we have to offer, but that doesn't mean we should stop offering it. When the time comes, you'll know what to do." As Maya rode the bus back to campus that evening, she thought about her grandmother's words. She had been hiding her abilities for so long that she had almost forgotten what it felt like to play music honestly, without pretense or fear of judgment. The recital was still weeks away, but Maya knew she was approaching a crossroads. She could continue pretending, give a deliberately mediocre performance, and maintain her secret. Or she could do something that would change everything. That night, she made her way to the storage room one more time, sat at the old piano, and played the Chopin Ballade the way it was meant to be played. In the darkness, surrounded by forgotten equipment and dust, Maya allowed herself to remember who she really was. With only 2 weeks left before the recital, Maya felt like she was walking a tightrope every single day. The pressure was coming from all directions now, and she could barely keep her carefully constructed facade from cracking. Every conversation, every glance, every well-meaning offer of help felt like another weight added to her shoulders. The music building had become a minefield for Maya. During her breaks between classes, she could hear her classmates practicing their pieces through the thin walls of the practice rooms. The sounds drifted through the hallways like a constant reminder of everything she was hiding. Jenny was finally getting the hang of her Mozart sonata, though she still rushed through the tricky passages. David had improved significantly with his simpler piece, and Maya could hear the confidence growing in his playing, but it was the conversations she overheard that really got to her. Students would gather in the lobby or the hallway, talking about the upcoming recital with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Maya's name came up more often than she cared to admit. "I heard she's been staying after class every day to work with Professor Williams," one student whispered as Maya passed by. "He's basically having to teach her how to read the music." "I feel so bad for her," another voice replied. "Can you imagine having to perform something that difficult when you can barely play scales?" Maya wanted to turn around and tell them exactly how well she could play scales, how she had been performing pieces far more complex than any of their assignments since she was 12 years old. Instead, she kept walking, her face burning with a mixture of embarrassment and frustration. The worst part was that some of her classmates were genuinely trying to be helpful. Tommy, who sat near her in class, had started offering to help her practice. He was a decent pianist, somewhere in the middle of the class skill-wise, and he seemed to think that working together might make her assignment more manageable. "Look, I know the piece you got is crazy hard," he said after class one day. But maybe if we broke it down into smaller sections, it might not seem so overwhelming. I've got a practice room reserved for this afternoon if you want to work on it together. Maya's heart raced. The offer was kind, but it would be disaster for her secret. She couldn't sit at a piano with Tommy and pretend to struggle with music she could play perfectly. Her fingers would automatically find the right notes. Her muscle memory would take over, and her cover would be blown completely. Thanks, but I think I need to work on it alone for now, she said, trying to sound grateful rather than panicked. I'm still just trying to learn the basic structure. Tommy nodded understandingly. Sure, I get it. But if you change your mind, just let me know. Nobody should have to tackle Chopin all by themselves. These interactions happened almost daily now. Her classmates had developed a protective attitude toward her, as if she were a wounded bird that needed their care. Maya appreciated their kindness, but every offer of help felt like another lie she had to tell. Another person she had to deceive. Professor Williams had become even more involved in her supposed struggle. He started staying after class specifically to work with her, going through the Chopin piece measure by measure. These sessions were absolute torture for Maya. She had to sit at the piano and deliberately play wrong notes, fumble through passages she knew perfectly, and ask questions about musical concepts she had understood for years. Let's work on this section here, Professor Williams would say, pointing to a particularly complex passage. The key is to think about the fingering first, then worry about the tempo. See how Chopin wrote these ornaments? They're not just decoration, they're part of the emotional expression. Maya would nod and take notes, all while knowing that she had spent hours analyzing those exact ornaments, understanding their historical context and emotional significance better than most graduate students. She had to bite her tongue to keep from sharing her own insights about the piece. The hardest moment came when Professor Williams sat down at the piano himself to demonstrate a difficult passage. Maya listened to his interpretation, which was technically correct but lacked the subtle emotional nuances that made the piece truly special. She could see places where his phrasing could be improved, moments where a different touch would bring out the music's hidden beauty. Do you hear how the melody line needs to sing above the accompaniment? He asked, playing the section again. It's all about balance and control. Maya nodded and tried to copy his playing, deliberately making it sound clumsy and uncertain. Inside, she was screaming. She wanted to show him how that melody could soar, how the accompaniment could support it without overwhelming it, how the whole passage could breathe with life and emotion. After these sessions, Maya would go back to her dorm room and lie on her bed, staring at the ceiling and wondering how much longer she could keep this up. Her roommate Chun had started noticing her mood swings. You've been really stressed lately, Chun observed one evening. Is everything okay with your classes? Maya wanted to tell her the truth, to share the burden of her secret with someone who might understand. But Chun was studying engineering and had never shown much interest in music. Maya doubted she would understand the complexity of the situation. Just worried about my final projects, Maya said instead. You know how it is? Chun nodded sympathetically. Yeah, this time of semester is brutal. Are you getting enough sleep? You've been staying up pretty late lately? Maya had been staying up late, but not for the reasons Chun thought. She had been sneaking out to the storage room more frequently, driven by a need to play the music honestly at least once each day. Those midnight sessions were the only time she felt like herself anymore during one of these late-night practice sessions. Maya had a close call that made her realize how precarious her situation had become. She was deep into the most emotional section of the ballade when she heard footsteps in the hallway outside the storage room. Her heart stopped as she lifted her hands from the keys, holding her breath and listening. The footsteps paused right outside the door. Maya could see the shadow of someone's feet under the door crack. She sat perfectly still, not daring to move or breathe. After what felt like an eternity, the footsteps moved on. But the incident left her shaken. The next day, she learned that the night security guard had been doing extra rounds because of some vandalism in the building. Maya realized she had been incredibly lucky. If the guard had opened the door and found her playing at that level, Her secret would have been exposed immediately, but even with the close call, Maya couldn't stop her midnight practice sessions. They were the only thing keeping her sane in a world where she had to pretend to be someone she wasn't. Every day at school, she played the role of the struggling student. Every night in the storage room, she remembered who she really was. The psychological toll was enormous. Maya found herself getting irritable about small things, losing sleep, and struggling to concentrate in her other classes. Her grades in subjects that had always been easy for her started to slip. She was putting so much energy into maintaining her musical deception that she had little left for anything else. One afternoon, Dr. Peterson called her into his office again. This time, he had her academic transcripts spread out on his desk, and his expression was more serious than before. "Maya, I'm concerned about your overall academic performance," he said. "Your grades have dropped significantly in the past month. Combined with what I'm hearing about your struggles in music class, I'm wondering if you might be taking on too much." Maya stared at the transcript, seeing her declining grades in black and white. She had been so focused on hiding her musical abilities that she had neglected everything else. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was failing at being a bad music student and a good regular student at the same time. "I think I'm just going through a rough patch," she said weakly. "Things should improve after the recital." Dr. Peterson leaned back in his chair. "Maya, I want you to consider something. What if we withdrew you from the music class? It's not too late to drop it without penalty, and it might give you the breathing room you need to focus on your other subjects." The suggestion hit Maya like a physical blow. Drop the music class? Give up the one legitimate connection to music she had ever had? Stop pretending to learn something she had been passionate about her entire life? "I'd like to stick with it," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I think I can handle it." Dr. Peterson studied her face carefully. "Maya, there's no shame in recognizing when something isn't working. Sometimes the brave thing is knowing when to step back and reassess." After leaving his office, Maya walked to her grandmother's nursing home again. She needed to see the one person who knew her secret, who understood what music meant to her. But when she arrived, she found her grandmother having one of her bad days. The dementia was making it hard for her to remember people and conversations. "Grandma, it's me, Maya," she said, sitting beside the bed. Her grandmother looked at her with confusion. "Maya, do I know you, dear?" Maya felt tears welling up in her eyes. Even her grandmother, the one person who had always understood her, was slipping away. She sat with the elderly woman for an hour, talking about music and memories, hoping something would spark recognition. The night of the recital arrived with unexpected spring rain drumming against the windows of the university concert hall. Maya sat in the small backstage area, watching drops of water race down the glass while her classmates warmed up around her. The sound of scattered piano notes and nervous chatter filled the air, but Maya felt strangely calm for the first time in weeks. She had made her decision 3 days ago, sitting in that dusty storage room with the old piano. After months of hiding, pretending, and living a lie, Maya had finally decided to be honest. Tonight, she would play the Chopin Ballade the way it was meant to be played. Whatever happened after that, she would deal with the consequences. The backstage area was cramped and poorly lit, with folding chairs arranged in a semicircle around a small mirror. Maya's classmates were dealing with their pre-performance nerves in different ways. Jenny was running through scales on a practice keyboard, her fingers moving rapidly across the silent keys. David was pacing back and forth, muttering the opening measures of his piece under his breath. Tommy was sitting quietly in the corner, eyes closed, probably visualizing his performance. Maya looked down at her hands, which were remarkably steady. She had expected to be nervous, terrified even, but instead she felt a strange sense of peace. For the first time in months, she didn't have to pretend to be someone else. In 30 minutes, she would sit at that piano and show everyone exactly who she was. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her roommate Chun. "Good luck tonight. You've got this." Maya smiled at the message, knowing that Chun had no idea what was about to happen. Nobody did, except Maya herself. Through the curtain that separated the backstage area from the concert hall, Maya could hear the audience settling into their seats. The sound of conversations, programs rustling, and chairs scraping against the floor created a familiar symphony that she had heard at countless recitals as a child. But tonight, she wasn't just listening from the audience. Tonight, she was the one who would step into the spotlight. Professor Williams appeared backstage, looking more nervous than his students. He was wearing his best suit and had combed his graying hair carefully. Maya could see the concern in his eyes as he looked at her, probably wondering if she would even be able to get through her piece without breaking down completely. "How are you feeling, Maya?" he asked, his voice gentle and encouraging. "Remember, the most important thing is to enjoy the experience. Don't worry about making mistakes. Everyone in that audience is here to support you." Maya nodded and managed a small smile. "I'm ready, Professor Williams. Thank you for everything you've done to help me." He squeezed her shoulder gently. "You've worked so hard this semester. I'm proud of you for not giving up even when things got difficult." If only. He knew how difficult things had really been, Maya thought. But she just thanked him again, and watched as he went to check on the other students. The recital began with Jenny's Mozart Sonata. Maya listened from backstage as her classmate played with solid technique but little emotional depth. The audience applauded politely when she finished, and Jenny returned backstage with a huge smile of relief on her face. "That felt amazing," she whispered to Maya. "I was so nervous, but once I started playing, it was like everything just clicked." David performed next, his simpler piece sounding exactly as Maya had expected. He played carefully, avoiding risks, focusing on accuracy rather than expression. The audience was supportive, and David looked proud of his accomplishment as he took his bow. One by one, Maya's classmates performed their pieces. Each performance was competent, some better than others, but all safely within the boundaries of what was expected. Maya found herself analyzing their interpretations, noting places where different phrasing or dynamics might have enhanced the music. It was a habit she had developed over years of listening to other pianists, but tonight it felt different. Tonight she would be the one under scrutiny. Tommy's performance was probably the best of the evening so far. He played with confidence, and showed real musical understanding in his interpretation. As he returned backstage, he caught Maya's eye and gave her an encouraging nod. "You're up next," he whispered. "Just remember to breathe and have fun with it." Maya stood up and smoothed down her simple black dress. She had chosen it carefully, wanting to look respectful but not overly formal. Her grandmother had always told her that the music should be the focus, not the performer's appearance. Professor Williams appeared at her side. "Are you ready, Maya?" She nodded, feeling her heart begin to beat faster. This was it. In a few minutes, her months of deception would be over, one way or another. "Ladies and gentlemen," Professor Williams announced to the audience, "our next performer is Maya Chun, who will be playing Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor." Maya heard the shift in the audience's attention. Even from backstage, she could sense their curiosity and concern. Word had spread about the struggling student who had been assigned an impossibly difficult piece. People were probably wondering if they were about to witness a disaster. She walked across the stage, her footsteps echoing in the suddenly quiet concert hall. The stage lights were bright, but she could still make out faces in the audience. She saw her academic advisor, Dr. Peterson, sitting in the third row with an expression of polite concern. Several faculty members from the music department were scattered throughout the audience, all watching her with varying degrees of curiosity and sympathy. The piano was a beautiful black grand, much nicer than the old upright she had been practicing on in the storage room. Maya approached the bench and adjusted it slightly, just as she had been taught years ago. She placed her hands on the keys for a moment, feeling the familiar weight and responsiveness of a quality instrument. The audience was completely silent. Now, Maya could hear her own heartbeat and the distant sound of rain against the windows. She closed her eyes and thought about her grandmother, about all those afternoons in the small apartment where she had first learned to love music. She thought about the years of hiding, the months of pretending, and the decision she had made to finally be honest. Then she began to play the opening notes of the Chopin Ballade floated through the concert hall with a delicacy and precision that immediately commanded attention. This wasn't the tentative, struggling performance everyone expected. Mayo's fingers moved across the keys with complete confidence, drawing sounds from the piano that seemed to surprise even the instrument itself. She could feel the audience's reaction without looking at them. The quality of the silence changed, became more focused, more attentive. People who had been settling in for a potentially difficult performance were suddenly leaning forward. Realizing they were hearing something unexpected, Maya lost herself in the music. For the first time in months, she wasn't thinking about maintaining a facade or hiding her abilities. She was simply playing the piece the way Chopin had intended it to be played. With all the emotion and technical skill she had developed over 15 years of secret practice, the ballade's opening theme sang out with a clarity that filled every corner of the concert hall. Maya's left hand provided a gentle but complex accompaniment, supporting the melody without overwhelming it. Her touch was perfect, bringing out the subtle colors and textures that made this piece one of Chopin's masterworks. As she moved into the more challenging middle section, Maya could hear people in the audience shifting in their seats. The technical demands of this part of the piece were considerable, requiring precise fingerwork and careful balance between the hands. Maya navigated these challenges with an ease that would have been impressive from an advanced student, let alone someone who was supposedly struggling with basic concepts. But it wasn't just the technical skill that was surprising the audience. Maya's interpretation of the piece showed a deep understanding of its emotional content. She brought out the dramatic contrasts, the moments of tenderness followed by sections of intense passion. Her phrasing was mature and sophisticated, showing musical insights that typically came only with years of study and experience. Professor Williams sat in the front row, his mouth slightly open, his eyes wide with disbelief. He had been expecting to offer encouragement to a student who was doing her best with an impossible assignment. Instead, he was witnessing a performance that rivaled anything he had heard from advanced students. Maya was now approaching the climax of the piece, where Chopin's writing becomes most demanding. The music built in intensity, requiring not just technical precision but also the physical stamina and emotional commitment to sustain the dramatic impact. Maya met every challenge, her playing becoming more powerful and expressive as the piece reached its emotional peak. The final section of the ballade requires the performer to bring together all the musical themes that have been introduced throughout the piece. Maya's performance tied these elements together with a maturity and understanding that left the audience breathless. Her final notes resonated through the concert hall with perfect clarity and emotional weight. When the last note faded away, the concert hall remained silent for a long moment. Maya lifted her hands from the keys and looked out at the audience for the first time since she had begun playing. The applause started slowly, like the first drops of rain before a storm. One person began clapping, then another, until the entire concert hall erupted in thunderous applause that seemed to shake the very walls. Maya stood at the piano, her heart pounding as she looked out at the audience. Every face she could see showed the same expression of complete amazement. Professor Williams was the first to stand, his applause more enthusiastic than Maya had ever seen from him. Soon, other faculty members were rising from their seats, then students, then parents and friends who had come to support the performers. Within moments, the entire audience was on their feet, giving Maya a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. Maya bowed gracefully, just as her grandmother had taught her years ago. She had performed in a few small recitals as a child, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. The sound of the applause was overwhelming, but more than that, it was the look in people's eyes. They had witnessed something they hadn't expected, something that challenged everything they thought they knew about the quiet girl who sat in the back of the classroom. As the applause finally died down and Maya walked off the stage, she could hear the buzz of conversation starting in the audience. People were talking in excited whispers, trying to process what they had just heard. Maya made her way backstage, where her classmates were waiting with expressions of complete shock. Jenny was the first to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. Maya, that was incredible. I had no idea you could play like that. Tommy just stared at her, shaking his head slowly. Where did that come from? You've been struggling in class all semester, and then that was professional level playing. David looked confused and a little hurt. Why didn't you tell us you were that good? We've been trying to help you, and you didn't need any help at all. Maya felt the weight of their questions and the confusion in their voices. She had been dreading this moment almost as much as the performance itself. How could she explain months of deception to people who had genuinely tried to help her? I'm sorry, she said quietly. I know this must be confusing. I never meant to lie to any of you. Before anyone could respond, Professor Williams appeared backstage, his face flushed with excitement and bewilderment. Maya, I need to speak with you immediately. What just happened out there, ... I don't understand. Maya followed him to a quiet corner of the backstage area, away from the other students. Professor Williams looked at her with a mixture of admiration and complete confusion. Maya, that performance was extraordinary. The technical skill, the musical understanding, the emotional depth, that represents years of advanced study. Where did this come from? Maya took a deep breath. She had known this moment would come, but she still wasn't sure how to explain everything. Professor Williams, I haven't been honest with you. I've been playing piano since I was 4 years old. His eyes widened. 4 years old? But in class, you've been struggling with basic concepts. You've been asking elementary questions about music theory. I know, Maya said, feeling the weight of her deception. I had to pretend. My parents never wanted me to study music. They thought it was impractical, a waste of time. So I learned in secret with my grandmother. Professor Williams sat down heavily in a nearby chair. Secret lessons? For how long? 15 years, Maya admitted. My grandmother studied piano in Taiwan before she came to America. She taught me everything, but I could never let my parents. No, when I finally got to college and could take music classes, I thought I had to keep pretending to be a beginner. But why? Professor Williams asked. Why continue the deception here? Maya struggled to find the right words. I was scared. I've been hiding who I am for so long that I didn't know how to stop. And I was afraid that if people knew how much I loved music, how good I was at it, they would expect me to change my whole life plan. Professor Williams shook his head slowly. Maya, what you just performed, that level of skill and understanding is rare. Very rare. You have a gift that most people can only dream of. Before Maya could respond, Dr. Peterson appeared, looking excited and confused. Maya, I just heard your performance. I had no idea you had that kind of musical ability. This changes everything about your academic plan. Word was spreading quickly through the building. Other faculty members began approaching Maya, all wanting to understand what had just happened. Dr. Martinez, the head of the music department, appeared with several other professors. Miss Chun, Dr. Martinez said, I've been teaching music for 30 years, and what I just heard was exceptional. We need to talk about your academic future immediately. Maya felt overwhelmed by all the attention. For months, she had been invisible. Just another struggling student. Now, she was suddenly the center of everyone's focus, and she wasn't sure how to handle it. I know this is a lot to process, Dr. Martinez continued. But talent like yours doesn't come along often. We need to discuss scholarship opportunities, advanced placement, private lessons with our best instructors. Maya's head was spinning. Scholarships? Advanced placement? These were things she had never even dared to dream about. She had been so focused on hiding her abilities that she had never considered what might happen if people discovered them. Tommy and Jenny approached, hesitantly, still looking bewildered. Maya, Jenny said, we don't understand why you felt like you had to hide this, but that performance was amazing. You're incredibly talented. I'm sorry I lied to you all, Maya said, her voice barely audible. I know you were trying to help me, and I appreciate it more than you know. I just didn't know how to tell you the truth. Tommy smiled and shook his head. Are you kidding? Don't apologize? What you just did was incredible. I'm just glad I got to hear it. The next few hours passed in a blur of conversations, phone calls, and planning sessions. Maya found herself in Dr. Martinez's office with several faculty members, discussing possibilities she had never imagined. They talked about advanced courses, performance opportunities, and even the possibility of pursuing a music degree. Maya, Dr. Martinez said, I want to be clear about something. What you demonstrated tonight isn't just technical skill. You have a deep musical understanding that suggests you could have a professional career if you wanted one. Maya felt tears welling up in her eyes. I never thought that was possible. My parents always said music was just a hobby, something that couldn't lead to a real career. With respect to your parents, Dr. Martinez said gently, they were wrong. Music can absolutely be a career, and you have the talent to succeed at the highest levels. 3 days later, Maya sat in her dorm room staring at her phone. She had just received a call from her parents, who had heard about the recital from a family friend whose daughter had been in the audience. The conversation had been difficult, filled with confusion, hurt feelings, and a lot of questions. Her mother had cried when she learned about the secret lessons with Maya's grandmother. Her father had been silent for a long time, processing the fact that his daughter had been living a double life for years. But in the end, they had listened when Maya explained how much music meant to her. We just wanted you to have a secure future, her mother had said. We thought music was too risky, too uncertain. I understand, Maya had replied. But this is who I am, this is what I love. Her parents had asked to hear the recording that someone had made of her performance. Maya had sent it to them, then waited anxiously for their response. When they called back, her mother was crying again. I had no idea, her mother said. You sound like a professional pianist. How did we not know? Because I got very good at hiding it, Maya had said. The biggest surprise came the next day, when Maya visited her grandmother at the nursing home. The elderly woman was having one of her good days, and her eyes were bright and alert when Maya walked into the room. Little bird, her grandmother said, reaching from Maya's hand. I heard about your performance. Mrs. Wang's granddaughter was there, and she told me everything. Maya felt tears streaming down her face. Grandma, I was so scared. But I remembered what you said about being brave enough to show people who I really am. Her grandmother squeezed her hand. You did exactly what you needed to do. Music isn't meant to be hidden away. It's meant to be shared, to touch people's hearts. The music department wants to give me a scholarship, Maya said. They want me to change my major to music performance. Her grandmother's eyes lit up. And what do you want to do? Maya smiled through her tears. I want to study music. I want to learn everything I can and share it with other people. I want to be honest about who I am. Then that's what you should do, her grandmother said. I'm so proud of you, little bird. You found your courage. Over the following weeks, Maya's life changed completely. She switched her major to music performance, received a substantial scholarship, and began studying with some of the university's most prestigious instructors. Her story spread throughout the campus, becoming a legend about hidden talent and the courage to be authentic. But perhaps the most important change was that Maya no longer had to pretend to be someone she wasn't. For the first time in her life, she could be completely honest about her love for music, her abilities, and her dreams.